I guess we'll just go ahead and get started. I was going to talk a little bit about cell health today and specifically brain cells. And
Mm.
So I'll just kind of go through some of that. And let's see, I'm going to share my screen. So this is a typical nerve cell. So we, call these neurons. And part of our pyramid of health, if you remember, is cellular health. And it's such a crucial part of building the pyramid of health. And hopefully we can explain that a little bit today. But a lot of times people will come into the clinic and some of their initial complaints are things like fatigue, brain fog, depression, anxiety. These are all signs that our brain cells are not working as well as they should be. Other things that some of us start to notice are like, I left my keys somewhere and I can't find them, or I just can't remember the name of that person. And these are all little clues, and sometimes we blame it on aging, right? Or we just kind of chuckle and laugh it off. But all of these are really significant signs that our brain is starting to be compromised. And it starts at the cellular level. And so it's really important. Our brain and our brain cells are really made to heal and to improve and change. But if the cells are sick, then it can't do that. And traditionally, when we have these symptoms, the doctor may order some labs or prescribe a prescription for depression, or if they're suspect of brain problems, then they'll go ahead and order an MRI. And the MRI can give us a good idea of, what the brain looks like on the outside. It's kind of like, I had a friend explain it to me. It's kind of like popping the hood and you look at the car engine, and you can maybe see that there's something wrong with the way the engine looks. But just popping the hood doesn't tell you anything about how the engine is functioning. And so MRIs can give us a really good idea of what things look like. Is there a tumor, or is there something abnormal with the way things look? But really getting down deep into how the cells are functioning, all the little things about the engine and how they're running is really important. And this right here is a picture of a nerve cell or a neuron. And so this part of the cell is called the cell body. So this basically houses all the important structures of the cell. And a neuron is a little bit different from other cells because it has these things that come off. These are called dendrites. And these will go and connect to other nerve cells. And you can see that there's a potential to connect to lots of different nerve cells. Inside this cell body, you have the nucleus, and this is like the information center of the cell. So this is where the DNA is at, and so that's where all the crucial information is that codes all the different proteins and things that need to be made. And then within the cell, there's different things that we call organelles. The endoplasmic reticulum is kind of like a packaging center. So it packages up things that need to be transported. The Golgi apparatus helps with that transportation. And the mitochondria are super, super important. This is where energy production takes place. And a normal cell outside of the brain would have about 1,000 mitochondria in every cell. But the brain has more like 10,000 mitochondria in the cells because the energy requirement in the brain is so, so high. And so these mitochondria are super important. So when they can take sugar, fats, and proteins and turn them into energy, what we call ATP, which is the currency of energy in the body or in the cells. And so mitochondrial health is super important for cellular health. And in this case is really important for nerve health and brain health. Outside, it's not pictured really well, but outside of this cell, it's lined by what we call a cell wall. And the cell wall is super important because that's how the cell interacts with other cells. And the cell wall is made up of fat. And so if you're eating really poor fats, your cell membrane is going to be composed of it's not going to be functioning as well because of the fats that you're consuming. If you're consuming really good fats, that cell membrane can be really healthy and can interact with other cells in a healthy way. The cell membrane also houses receptors that help interact with the other cells. Inside here, like these little blue dots, may be things called ribosomes. That's where proteins are synthesized. And in the nerve cell, those would be proteins such as neurotransmitters. And these get packaged and then they get moved into these little packages that then can be moved and outside of the cell to communicate with other cells. I'm going to show you a different picture of kind of what that looks like. So this is kind of what we were just looking at. We were looking at a cell body, the nucleus. So this is a representation of a neuron. That neuron has what's called an axon, which comes down here, and this interacts with other nerve cells, the dendrites of other nerve cells. And that place of interaction is called a synapse in in the neurons. And this is a magnified version of what that kind of looks like. And so you can see that these little dots represent the neurotransmitters or the proteins that have been produced by the cell, and they get packaged in these vesicles. And these vesicles come down here and they fuse with the membrane of the cell. And when they fuse, that will dispense these neurotransmitters into this synaptic space. And then you can see here, this is the next neuron that it's trying to communicate. And this is the cell membrane. And you can see this little thing in the cell membrane is a receptor. So this neurotransmitter, once it's in this space, it can do a few things. It can interact with this receptor, which will then send a signal to the next nerve. And then that signal will keep going. And hopefully that nerve will send it to the next nerve. Well, these neurotransmitters can also get destroyed within this space, or they can be taken back up, back into the nerve cell. And so this is how our nerves communicate with each other. So in order for the cell to make these proteins, it needs a lot of signaling. A lot of signaling needs to take place. So it needs the right amino acids, which we get from our food. It needs the right cofactors, which are going to be vitamins. It needs the right hormone signaling. And so there's lots of things that go in to helping the cell to be really healthy. And if the cell is not healthy, this message can't take place. So for example, if the cell is not healthy and these receptors aren't very healthy and the cell membrane isn't very healthy, even if your doctor gives you a medicine to help increase these neurotransmitters, it may not help us if the cell is not healthy enough to receive that signal. For example, a lot of the depression medicines prevent these neurotransmitters from being taken back up into the cell. Well, if the cell isn't healthy enough to make the neurotransmitters in the first place, then that medicine's not going to work. Or if this receptor is not working well, or if the membrane is not healthy. And the way that nerves work is that nerve cells either fire or they don't fire. And so they have to be healthy enough to a certain point to where they can fire. And so that's why cellular health is really so crucial and important. We call this characteristics of either firing or not firing. We call that kind of an all or nothing phenomenon. And so it's really important to realize that if we're having those symptoms that we talked about, fatigue, brain fog, anxiety, depression, we're starting to be a little bit forgetful. Those are all signs that our nerve cells are starting to struggle. If we wait until things are really bad, like until we have Alzheimer's disease or we have a neurological problem that's progressed, a lot of times it's harder to get things working again. If you look over here at this picture, you can see that every nerve cell has multiple dendrites. And what's really cool about the nervous system is that if, let's say that this cell right here gets damaged and isn't working, well, these dendrites from other cells can start reaching out and forming new connections. And so that's what we call neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to set up new connections and maintain our function or improve our function. That's what allows us to learn new things or to regain function that we've lost from damage like a stroke or brain trauma or even problems like Alzheimer's. If we can work to nourish the cell, make it healthy, and then stimulate the nervous system, it can start forming new connections with all these different nerves. And so part of cellular health is really getting back to the basics of nutrition, evaluating that nutrition, stress, and making sure that our cells have all the right environment that they need. So things that can keep a cell from functioning right are things like toxins, stress, infections, and there's something called the cell danger response. And is what the cell danger response is when the cell senses that something bad is going on, and so it will kind of shut down its productivity. It's kind of like what's going on in our world right now with the pandemic. In order to keep things safe, it shuts down production. And our current pandemic, we've shut down things to keep the virus from spreading and causing more trouble in our communities and in our world. And it's very effective. So that danger response is really important. But let's say that the virus clears up in our world, or mostly clears up, but our economy and everything stays shut down. That then becomes a chronic problem for our economy and our world functioning. The same thing can happen in our cells. The cell can go through that danger response and then be kind of like stuck in that response and not amp up production after the danger is gone. And so this is what we see sometimes in things like chronic fatigue syndrome. We also see this in chronic infections such as viral infections or things like Lyme disease, the cell goes through this cell danger response and doesn't want to come out of it. And so the cell kind of shuts down all of its energy production. So it leads to fatigue and dysfunction in our systems. And so it's really important for us to try and nourish and help these cells. What's really interesting too is that we see chronic cellular problems from things like emotional trauma. So childhood trauma, for example, can actually change the way your cells function for the rest of your life in some cases. And so it's really important to deal with those traumas, all those experiences, and really get to nourishing and helping those cells. I'm going to unmute you guys and see if you have any questions. But that's kind of a little summary about cellular health and why it's important and why it's part of building that pyramid of health. And you can type in the chat box, or you can just ask me any questions if you have any, or comments. Was that confusing or was that helpful?
I thought it was helpful. How long does it take when you change your nutrition to see a positive impact on your cells and their functions?
Yeah, so everybody's different, so it depends on how depleted the nutrients are. So that's one thing. The cells also might be still getting a signal to be in that danger response, right? And so we want to try and remove as many of those danger signals as possible. So we want to try and calm down any infections such as Lyme or viral infections. We want to try and calm down signals of toxicity, so reducing toxic signals, reducing stress in your life. And so part of cellular health is also some of those things that we mentioned last week. The lifestyle factors or those healthy habits can help keep our cells healthy or get them out of that danger response and start kind of perking up and doing what they're meant to do. So it's kind of everybody's different, but some people will respond really quickly. We get them on a good diet, sometimes some good nutrients, and the cells start perking up right away. Other times, if the cells have been under a lot of trauma or stress from disease or infection or toxins, it takes a little bit longer to get things amped up. So that didn't really give you a definite answer to your question.
That's okay.
But it just, yeah, everybody's different. Some people will respond really quickly and others, it takes a while. We talked a lot about the nerve cells today, and nerve cells typically tend to take a little bit longer to respond if they've been damaged. It takes a little bit longer to regenerate that tissue, repair them, and get those new signals and new pathways set up. Any other questions?
Does in terms of how cellular health fits into organ and tissue health, and I think those big pictures. Can you address whether to enhance or affect the function of a particular system in the body, do you have to address the cellular components before that or at the same time? I don't even know what I'm asking.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So if you remember, part of our pyramid of health is this area, I started calling it the bioplex this week, but we've called it the web or the network or the matrix. That's how all the body's systems interact with each other. And so, for example, today we talked about neurons, which are brain cells, but you're referring more to the brain itself as an organ.
Yes.
And how can we address that, and do we have to address them separately? I like to think of it, I like to focus a little bit on that cell health because it helps us realize that we need those little building blocks and all those little functions to be working for the organ or the system to be working, right? But we can work on both things at the same time. For example, if someone has brain dysfunction and they come in and we see that some of their nutrients are low, their stress level is high, maybe their sugar levels are too high, we can start working on some of those things to help the cells start working better. But at the same time, we can also start working on overall brain and nerve function by starting to give stimuli to the brain. For example, if somebody's balance is off, we can start having them do exercises to start working on their balance to send signals and stimuli to the brain that says, hey, we need to start hooking up new connections and pathways to try and redevelop this balance. So we can kind of work on both things at once. You know, if you have digestive problems, we want to make sure the cells of the digestive tract are healthy, right? So that's why we try to do probiotics, sometimes glutamine, sometimes other herbs to help the cells of the digestive tract to work better and to be healthier so that they can work better. But overall digestive health is going to be working on things like chewing your food, thinking the right way about your food, making sure that you're having bowel movements. So we work on the system at the same time, but also on getting away from the cellular topic and more of the bioplexus, how everything fits together. We may find that working on your brain health is going to benefit your digestive function because the brain helps to drive that digestive function. we may also find that someone with brain problems needs digestive help because the digestive system has a huge influence on the brain and nerve system. So everything works together. That was kind of a long answer to your question as well. Any other questions?
No?
Was this helpful today?
Yes, thank you. Very much so.
It was interesting too. It's a dynamic building block sort of a thing.
Yes.
What's that word again?
Bioplex. It's not an official word. It's a word that I made up.
It's cool. It's something to spend a little time on. Yeah.
Yeah, so I like the word, at least for me, it kind of helps give the picture that our body is complex and it's made up of multiple different parts, and it interacts. All those different systems interact with each other, and it extends beyond us, right? Because our bioplex includes our environment around us. It includes our relationships with other people. It includes our interaction with Mother Nature. So it's very complex, but it's really important for us to realize that our health in all of its aspects is dependent upon how we interact with all of those other things and how they're interacting together. So it's a big process. Well, I appreciate you guys being here today. We'll get the recording out. We're just learning how to get these recordings out, and hopefully as we do it more, we'll be able to get them out quicker. But we will get the recording sent out to you. You'll receive the link for that through email. And next Wednesday, we'll meet at the same time, same place. And I appreciate you guys being here. We love you and hope you're doing well. And if you have any other personal questions or issues, make sure you get on the portal and communicate with us. We're also available through, telemedicine visits, so we can do that if we need to. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you next week.